working our way down through Module 5 where we've been talking about all the page setup and print options that Excel has. We've talked now about headers and footers a little bit. We've talked about your print titles, your comments, but there are so many other page setup options there that I just want to take a few moments and look through some of those and get you familiar with what's there so you'll know where to go if you want to do some of these different things. Let's go ahead and head over to Excel and let's look through those page setup options. You want to make sure you're on the Page Layout tab, and then we're going to be looking at all of these options here. Let's start with margins. Here are some pre-designed margins that you can pick from, and you can see that every page has 6 margins. There is a top, bottom, left and right, and header and footer. Notice your header and footer margins are always less than your top and bottom. If they were more, they would actually appear in the printed part of your page, and you don't want that. If you don't like any of these that they have pre-set up for you, all you have to do is come to the very bottom where it says Custom Margins and click there, and that'll take you into this page setup that we were in earlier. Now remember, the way to get directly here, you can actually go here to where it says Page Setup with the little arrow, and it'll take you into this one. Here's where you can change your top, bottom, left, and right margins again. And something else that'll be of interest to you is this Center on Page option. If you have a small spreadsheet you're working with and you print it out, it's always going to print in the top left. To make it a little bit nicer, you can center it on the page horizontally. And sometimes you may want to center something both horizontally and vertically. You can just choose both or none. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And that's how the margins option works. The next one I want to show you is orientation. When you print as you would normally think of printing something, that's what we call portrait. If you turn the paper sideways, that's what we call landscape, and sometimes you need that when you have a lot of columns left to right that you want to get on a page. The next thing is where it says size. You can always change the paper size. Normally you have 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper, but then there's legal and there's envelopes, and you can see these other sizes that you might want to use. The next one is called the print area. If you have a certain area that you're going to want to be printing and you don't want it to print the rest of it, you can set the print area. And basically what would happen here is you would go through and actually select, just by dragging down like this, the area that you think you might want to print, and then that's how you would set the print area. You can also go back and clear the print area, and then that way when you get ready to print, you'll be able to tell it that you want to print a page or something specific that way. Breaks is where you're going to put in page breaks or remove page breaks. Now normally what Excel will do is it knows how much will fit on a page and it will insert a break for you. But if you want the break somewhere else, you can certainly do that yourself. Right now you can see that it breaks here at row 52 right at the bottom. You want to put manual ones above the ones the computer generated because you can't put more on a page physically. You can put less, but you can't put more. I would actually select one of the rows above the one the computer put in, and then I could go to breaks and say insert a page break. And then that will actually put a page break there for me, and you can see it there, and it got rid of the other one. And do you notice this one is a straight line where the other one was a green dotted line? That's how you know the difference between the ones you put in and the ones the computer put in. If you want to delete one, then go ahead and just select the row above and below, and you can go back to the breaks and say remove page break. And so there's lots of ways to put in page breaks or remove page breaks that way. Now let's talk about backgrounds for a second. This is really neat. You have the ability to take a picture that you might have already in your computer somewhere, or you can do a Bing search, or you might have one saved in your personal OneDrive. Let's say we do a search and we look for money. What will happen is that it's going to go out to Bing and it's actually going to look for any pictures that you have permission to use, and then you're going to go ahead and choose one and you're going to say insert. And now you'll see the background of your whole entire spreadsheet here is that picture of money. Now this makes it really hard to read, But that is an option, and it does not print, by the way. It's only for viewing on the screen. Notice you can now delete your background if you wanted to do that. Now let me scroll back up to the top. We already talked about your print titles, so let's move over here to where it says width, height, and scale. And this is where you're going to be able to go ahead and shrink the width of your printout. If you want it to fit, for example, 2 pages, you can actually change the width of it, you can change the height, or you can change the scaling. Now width and height are automatic, but you can go in and say you want to set it to 1 page, 2 pages, or whatever you want to set it to. Now scaling, it's actually going to look at your page at 100%, and let's just say 1 column wouldn't print on that page, for example. It would actually shrink it so that you could get everything on 1 page. That's called scale to fit. Let's go back over here to page setup because I want to go down here to this arrow and see if there's any options that we didn't have buttons for. On the page tab, here's our portrait and landscape that we talked about. There's your scaling we just mentioned. Sometimes if 1 column prints on another page, you might try the fit to option to see if it would make everything fit 1 page across and 1 page tall. You can change your paper size here. We already talked about margins, and we talked about header and footer, and we talked about a couple things under the sheet tab. I did want to mention that you have the ability to print your grid lines right here. Sometimes people ask me, how do you print these lines around each of the cells? And those are your grid lines. But what you really want to do is print borders, not grid lines. Grid lines will print all of them that are on the page. You can also choose to print this black and white, what they call draft quality, or print the row and column headings, which would be this ABC or this 1, 2, 3 over here. You can also tell it how you'd like to print the page order. If you have 5 pages, maybe you want to go down first and then across, or across and then back down, whatever works for you. And that's going to be your page setup options right there. So you can see there's quite a few options there as far as your page setup. Well, let's go ahead and go over to section 5 now, and I'll show you how to go ahead and have everything fit on 1 page if these options we talked about up here don't work for you. Hey, we're still working in Module 5, and in this module we are talking about your page setup and print options in Excel. We're all the way down now to section 5, and I want to talk to you in this section about how to make everything print on 1 page. Because what happens often is you will set up your workbook and you'll go to print it, and 1 column prints on a 2nd page. Let's talk about how you make it all fit and look really nice when you print it out. I've got this exercise open that has several columns of information. If you notice, it has the name of the salesperson over in column A, and then it has figures for January through August, and the last column, column J, are the totals here. I want to look at it and see what it looks like if we go ahead and print it. I'm just going to go to the bottom and go to the page layout view, which is the middle view there. And you'll see that page 1 actually prints from the column that says name all the way over to the column that says July. But look how it chopped off August and totals, and it's going to print it over on this 2nd page. That's just not going to work for me. Let's look at some options that we can do to get everything to fit on 1 page for us. Let me go back down to the normal view and let's see what we've got. The first thought is that you may want to turn the paper from portrait to landscape. If I go back to the page layout tab here at the top, then I can change the orientation to landscape. But I will tell you that we don't have enough columns to make it actually look right. If I choose landscape, let's go look at it now. I'm going to go down and do the page layout. And you can see that I really have a lot of space left over here, and I could do a lot of things to take up that space, but this isn't really what I wanted in this particular case. Let me go back to normal, and we're going to change it back to portrait because that's what I want. The second option is I can go up and adjust this scaling right here. Right now it's set at 100%. I could go down and make it maybe 75% or 80%. The problem is that I don't know exactly which one's going to work, if that's going to be too small or too large. Let me show you what we can do, and it will actually adjust the scaling for us and get it set up perfectly. Here's what we're going to do. Let's go down to the bottom where our views are, and let's use the last view, which is your page break preview. I'm just going to click on that. And in this particular view, you're going to see the page break right here. Also notice there's a page break right down here underneath the words Canadian Division. All you have to do is actually drag this dotted line even with the edge of the page, and you've actually just changed the scaling right here. And if you notice, it made it 90%. Now I wouldn't know that automatically, so it knew that for me and it went ahead and adjusted it. If you notice, the page break that's down at the bottom here is going to break up that Canadian Division. Now I could drag this one all the way down to the bottom and fit everything on one page, but I can tell you just from working with this exercise so many times, it's too small. In this case, I think I'll just drag it back up above the Canadian Division like that, and at least all of Canada will print together on the same page. And that's the easiest way to change your page breaks. Now obviously, if you have a lot of columns left to write, that orientation might be the best bet for you, and then this may not work as good as it does right now. But when you've only got that situation with a couple of columns, then it works great. I'm going to go back to the normal view, and now we've got 2 pages and it's going to print perfectly. What I'd like to do now is talk to you a little bit about printing. So let's go ahead and head over to section 6, and I will talk to you over there real quick about printing your workbooks. Okay, welcome back. We're in Module 5, and we're going to wrap it up with section 6, where we'll talk a little bit about printing your workbooks. When you go to print your workbook, you're not always going to want to print everything that's in the workbook. Sometimes you want to print just one sheet. Sometimes you want to print just a particular section on that sheet. I want to go through and show you all the options that you have when you're printing your workbooks. When you get ready to print anything, you can go up and use the print that happens to be here on your icon bar, but if you really want all the choices, I suggest you go through the File tab and go into the Backstage view and print that way. When you click on the File tab, you're going to see an option that says Print about halfway down right here. And you're going to have lots of options when you're printing. The first thing I want to point out is this is where your print preview is, and you'll be able to go back and forth between the pages. Down at the very bottom, it'll say page 1 of 2 in this case, and you can use the arrows to go back and forth to see how it's going to print. If you remember all those page setup options that we looked at in section 4, you can get to those in here as well. First of all, if I happen to click page setup right here, this screen will look familiar because we went through all of these options. A lot of these are in the page setup, but let me go back through those with you. First of all, here's your custom scaling. This is where we just went through in section 5 and talked about getting it on one page, and we adjusted the scaling to do that. You can set your custom margins here. We saw this earlier, and if we didn't like any of these, we could go to the custom margins and change it that way. The next thing is the paper size. Probably you want 8.5 by 11, but if you wanted to change it, then here's that option. You can turn the paper from portrait to landscape here. Now here's something you haven't seen yet, collated. Collated basically means that if you wanted 10 copies of this, it would print page 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 10 times. If it's uncollated, it's going to print all of page 1, then it'll print all of page 2. Here you can print one-sided, or if you have a printer that you can print on both sides, you can go ahead and flip the pages and you can print on both sides that way. Currently it's going to print the active sheet. That would be sheet 1 that we've been working on. And if we want to print specific pages only, we can specify that right here. So let's say for whatever reason you just want to print page 2, you would set it up like this. But if you don't do that, it's going to print all the pages on that active sheet. If I drop the list down here, I can also print the entire workbook. That means that any sheets that actually had printing on them, it would actually print. I could also print a selection. That would be, let's say I just want to print Australia and I had selected it before I came in here, then I'd be able to print just the selection. The next thing is the printer that you're going to be printing to, and you have all these choices available. This would be how many copies of this would you like. And then when you're ready, you would actually hit the print and this would print right out the exact way that you want it. That's how printing is going to work. All of that has to do with your page setup and print options. We're going to wrap up Module 5 now, and let's move over to Module 6, where we're going to talk a lot about adding some rows, some columns, and cells into some of your existing workbooks.